Before we begin, a moment of silence for all the pixel art animators that are going to be put out of a job because of this tutorial. Just a moment of silence, please. Okay, fuck those guys. I'm gonna teach you guys how to automate this kind of thing, which is useful for changing perspective. If you haven't guessed it yet, what's happening here is we have a normal Blender render, so just kind of like a cylinder spinning. We're gonna set this up, it's not that big of a deal, but the magic, of course, happens in compositing, where we take the render layers node, we take this and then mess with a secret node group that I'm gonna show you how to make. There's a lot of math here that I'm gonna hold your hand through, squeeze it so tight that you understand it perfectly. I'm gonna show you how to make this thing, and the best part about this setup is it's completely procedural, meaning unlike normal pixel art that takes forever to make, and yes, you could probably make it more stylistic if you do it by hand. Unlike that, with proceduralism, we get to decide something like the resolution. So this is more like 16-bit style where you have more pixels to play with. You make this bigger, we're getting closer to something like 8-bit, or you could get crazy where you have almost no pixels to play with. I'm gonna keep this at 25. And the second parameter we are gonna talk about is the kind of color palette, because pixelation, or actually pixel art, isn't only about pixelating, it's about color choices. That's what makes it stylistically look correct. So if we decrease this, we're gonna get less and less colors that this is actually going to be able to use until the point where it only has like 2 colors to choose from, or I think this is 3. So we're going to talk about how to do all these things upcoming right about now. So let me show you how to do it. So first thing we need to do is create whatever animation it is that we want to pixelate. In this case, I'm going to be doing a spinning coin because it's easy to make, and it also showcases this changing of perspective that would be it would be a pain in the ass to animate by yourself. So I'm going to delete this, replace it with a cylinder, because coins are like cylinders, they don't look like other shapes here. Either way, we start with a cylinder. I'm gonna reshape this until it looks like a coin. If you don't know how to model, this tutorial is probably gonna completely go over your head because this is kind of the easiest part. So just select the top 2 faces, or I guess the top and the bottom faces. We're gonna eye for inset, and then we are gonna extrude, but not just along anything. We're gonna extrude along normal so that they each go inwards until you have something that looks like a coin. And then finally, let's just select the 2 boundaries, Control B to bevel, and just create a simple looking coin. Okay, so now we have our coin, and let's actually set up our camera so it's positioned above. Again, all we're doing here is setting up the base animation. This has nothing to do with pixel art yet. You could do whatever you want here. You could have a barrel, you could have a character animated, just anything you want in 3D. So here we have the setup. To have this rotate, what we're gonna do is we're gonna add in a keyframe for rotation. This is gonna say coin. Don't rotate here, just be at this position on frame 1. And then let's say 12 frames later. And by the way, another thing that makes it look like pixel art is the frame rate that you choose. So we want to pick something like 12 frames per second, which is like 24 frames per second animated on 2s, meaning just kind of only use half the frames. But 12 frames per second is going to work for our purposes. So let's make the project only 12 frames long. And then we're actually going to have it finish the rotation on frame 13 so that frame 1 and 12 don't actually repeat. So what I'm gonna do is we're just gonna rotate this along the, not X, but the Y axis. So let's make it 360 degrees. And by the way, I haven't mentioned this. This is recorded in front of a live studio audience. Do you wanna say hello?
Hello.
Okay, so now you understand why I'm a little timid, a little embarrassed to make this tutorial. Either way, so here we have the base set up. Again, you want this to be at a low frame rate, so it kind of looks like this. And another thing you can do to make this look more stylistic is play with the interpolation. So linear kind of makes it look boring. It's a constant spinning. Bezier, which is a French word for make it look fucking good, does something that looks a bit better. And we can actually make it look even more stylistic by changing the interpolation type in the graph editor. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to look at the graph. It's not a velocity graph. It's just kind of like I wouldn't call it a position graph. It's just a value graph for our Y rotation. What we can do is we can take these handles and scale them by something like 50%, both of these, which will just make it look much smoother so that most of the animation, is happening in the middle. So it's going to start slow and then speed up and then end slow. So let's actually see what this looks like. Okay, so now we have our spinning coin. Final thing that we need to take care of is make it look like it's made of gold or whatever it is you want it to be. So shading workspace, we are going to go back to our camera view and let's make this a BSDF with some kind of gold looking material. So I'm just going to pick something yellow and bright, and I think that's probably pretty good. You can make it a bit shinier, make it a bit metallic. Again, a lot of these details are going to be lost pretty soon once we actually do our conversion. So only thing we should really consider is where our light is going to be, because this shadow is going to turn into darker pixels. So it actually matters quite a bit. So I'm going to position this somewhere where we get quite a bit of shadow. And let's make that so it has a very small radius so that the shadow is very sharp. And then let's also make that power stronger. And by the way, if your Eevee shadows are looking messed up, whereas your Cycles shadows kind of look fine, right? Here's a good shadow, whereas in Eevee, this kind of is messed up. What you can do is you can go to shadows and then take your cube size and increase this, which basically says Blender, spend more of your resources making the shadow. Okay, so you could spend more time lighting and making this look good or whatever, but let's say that you have your animation. The cool thing about this is, again, we have the shadows. We have some of this like specular, so it kind of has this reflection, which will make it look like it's made of metal. Once you have this, basically the name of the game is how do we turn this into pixel art. So final thing I'm going to do before we are good to render is just set this to transparent so that we don't have anything back here. And then now that we have our completed animation, we can just take a frame, hit F12 to render, and we have our base thing, which is still having pretty messed up shadows. So you could either bump up the shadows, or actually in my project file, which will be on the Patreon, I did end up using Cycles, so that's just what I'm going to do. But you could have shadows in Eevee if that's what you desire. Okay, so let me just set this up. Okay, so let's save, call this garbage. That's what this is, render. We have our base coin. How do we turn it into pixel art in compositing? Okay, so what we're gonna do is go to the compositing workspace, use nodes, and the name of the game is how do we take render layers, take it to composite, and what is it that we put in between to get from here to here that will give us our pixelation, okay? So first of all, let's add in a viewer so we can see what we're doing, and here is what we wanna do. So the first step is gonna be our pixelation. This is what takes our image and makes it so that there isn't this kind of high resolution look to it. It's still going to be 1920 by 1080, but it's going to be using blocky kind of looking stuff. So first step is you want to add in a scale node. In fact, add 2 of these. Actually, we can add 1 at a time, but let's just mute this. With your first scale node, what I want you to do is make this image very small. So something like 0.1 is going to make this very small. And when we zoom in, you can see that this makes it look pixelated. The smaller that we make it, so something like 0.05, it's going to look more and more pixelated, okay? So this is the first idea. We are then going to add in a pixelate node, which basically, it doesn't do anything, but it says, Blender, take what we've done here, our scaling, and keep it like this. This is what it does. So that when we add in our second scale node, we're going to invert whatever we did here. So if we make this 20 times smaller, here you make it 20 times bigger. So we blow it back up, and I'm trying to zoom out here. You can see this actually preserves our pixelation. If this wasn't here, it would basically be scaling it down, then back up, and nothing has actually changed. So pixelate says, keep it like this. How do we make this procedural? Well, we say this number and this number, which are reciprocals of each other. One is the opposite of the other. We say, don't just plug in those values. We can say we want to make it whatever we want. So for this one, let's say we want it to be 10. So we just say make it 10 times bigger instead of 20 times bigger. And then for the initial scaling down, we make it 1 over 10. So let's add in a math node, set this to division, 1 over our value. So 1 divided by this value. And then we plug it in right here for X and Y. In other words, what we've done is we say, take this number, take the reciprocal, so it's going to make it smaller by 10 times, pixelate, and then make it again bigger now that it's stored our transformation, okay? So if we were to make this 20, it gets more pixelated, 30 more pixelated, and a small value like 1 is going to be barely pixelated at all. And by the way, since it's doing some kind of weird sampling thing, it is always best to add in a bit of a blur before you do this, just so that if there's any fireflies or noise in our render, especially in these shadows, those kind of get canceled out. So we could add in a bit of blur. So you can see right now the blurred version has a softer shadow. And then this is what we're going to plug into our setup, okay? So this is without blurring and with blurring. You can see it changes it a bit, but it is worth doing. Okay, so that is step 1, and this works on any frame, so we can go a couple frames down and then re-render so our composite node has more data that it can mess with. So right now, this is fine. The second part of this process, now that we have our pixelation, and by the way, I like the look of 25, that level of pixelation. The second step of this is taking our color palette. Let me try that again. It's taking the color palette and reducing it to less options, because since we only have allegedly a limited color space, maybe 256 colors to work with, you don't want to be able to choose from any color under the sun, okay? So how do we do this? What I'm going to do is I'm going to separate this by HSV, that is separate hue saturation value. So we can look at the hue, that is the type of color, the saturation, that's the intensity of the color, and the value, and that is the brightness of the color. And this is what we're actually going to be messing with. We want to say take our vibrance, our lightness, whatever you want to call it, our brightness, and say don't let it be like any value between 0 and 1. We're going to say take this and let it only be one of 5 values or however many. Okay, so we're going to also do a combine hue saturation value. So let's connect hue to hue, saturation to saturation, value to value, alpha to alpha. In other words, separate, combine, do nothing, right? This doesn't change anything, right? So let's actually get rid of this. So this is what ends up in our composite. So again, we've separated, we've combined, nothing's happening. What we want to do is put something in between here that messes with the vibrance, and here's what it's going to be. We are going to add in a math node. We're going to connect vibrance to this. So right now we are looking at the vibrance and adding 0.5 for no reason, but we are going to do something that makes sense. What I'm going to do is right now vibrance is going to be any value between 0 and 1, and we don't want to say let it be anything between 0 and 1. Let it be 0, 0.2, 0.4, 0.6, 0.8, or 1. So it has to be banded to one of those. It's going to be kind of restricted. So to do this, I'm going to multiply, in this case, by 5. I'm going to add in another, and you're going to see there's a common theme between this and the whole pixelation trick of this scaling and reverse scaling and all this. So here we are going to multiply by 5. Here we are going to divide by 5. So effectively nothing changed. And in between, the magic step is going to be adding in a node that says either round, floor, or ceiling. In other words, we took 0 to 1, this vibrance value, and said now make it 0 to 5. That's our option. We're going to say clamp it to, some integer. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or, you could floor it or you could round it. I guess rounding is the most accurate, and then divide again. So let's talk about in a second what this does, but first let's just set up a value node just like we did before so we can control this with a single number. And this is what we want to be our new vibrance, okay? So basically we took our image and we just said mess with the vibrance and then output that same thing, okay? So right now, if we were to mess with this number, you can see if I set it to 1, you're going to get less colors. Set it to like 0.5, you're going to get very, very few colors because, again, now we are taking our vibrance and saying, we're limiting the number of options, the number of things it can be rounded to. And as this increases, just like with the last one, we get more and more options, okay? So same idea as before. Another thing we can do to give this more of a pixel art kind of look is you see that we have this kind of very nice blurred pixels along the contour, which does look good. However, it's kind of like too perfect. We took Blender, we did this 3D render, and we're trying to beat this up until it has the correct look, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our alpha and we're going to say don't let it be anything between 0 and 1 where you can have half transparent pixels. No. We are going to round it to the nearest integer. In other words, it's either going to be transparent, 0, or opaque, 1, because it has to round to either 0 or 1. Okay? So now what you have is 2 different sliders. So here we have our resolution slider. Again, this says, how much detail do we want in our pixel art? And the other one says how much color do we want in our color palette. And you can play around with these values without having to redraw again and again and again. That's the value. So you can just render another frame. So for example, this one, and you can see that now we can, again, do the same kind of thing where we can change the number of pixels and we can change the amount of color palette. If you want it to be high contrast, you can do that. If you want it to have basically the entire thing, just say 100, right? Which is still going to look pixelated, but it's just going to have a very limited color palette. And what I did for the initial project is I took all of these nodes and then threw them inside a node group, Control G, just so that all of this would be hidden. So you basically just have 2 sliders. I guess I should have put the blur node in there, but whatever. And then when you render this bad boy out, I guess I already showed you, but let me just show you how you might view this thing. So save your project. I'm not going to because I know how to make this. I made the tutorial. I know how to do it. What you want to do is import in whatever it is that you rendered. For me, it's going to be right here. Again, this was originally 12 frames per second. It will automatically fix for that. And then we just say Blender play between frame 1 and 12, which ends up looking like that. Again, the reason this looks so good is not because we took it and pixelated it. That would just make it look like a mosaic blur was applied to it. No. The reason this looks good is because of the 12 frames per second. It looks good because of the limited color palette, because of the interpolation that we gave it, and because, I don't know, because I made it and everything I make looks good. Anyways, Hope you enjoyed the tutorial. If you want more, I guess maybe come back to the channel. That's where they will be hosted. If you are interested in exclusive tutorials that are not posted for free on YouTube and stuff like that, Patreon is where you go to get that. You can also get behind the scenes access. You also get Discord stuff that you wouldn't otherwise be able to see. Blend files for projects like these. I will be uploading the Blend project file so you can actually play around with this and have the node group so you don't have to make it yourself anyways. Thank you for watching this nonsense. See ya. Oh wait, do you want to say goodbye? Yes. Yeah.